The atmosphere on Earth was thicker than Command had warned, heavy with the residue of combustion and sorrow. Major Kaeldar of the Othelian vanguard stood beneath the fractured canopy of trees along the mountain ridge, his war-scarred armor cloaked in an active camouflage veil. Human eyes would not see him, but he saw everything. Kaeldar had been bred for warfare. The Othelian genome had been refined for millennia to eliminate doubt, soften empathy, and enhance the precision of violence. Yet, as he crouched beside a moss-covered rock overlooking the ruined village in the valley below, a strange unease gnawed at him. This world, this blue planet teetering on the edge of self-erasure, felt unfamiliar in a way that had nothing to do with climate or gravity. It was the noise. Not the hum of engines or the chatter of drones. Those were easy to filter, but the noise of lives, of humans screaming, praying, laughing, sometimes all at once. The humans called the place Sabin Valley. To Kaeldar, it was Sector 19 Beta, a mission zone for passive observation. No contact. No interference. His directive was to witness, to catalog patterns in human warfare, and determine whether Earth posed any future risk to the wider galactic order. Command had expected tribal disorganization, emotional instability, perhaps an entertaining display of primitive aggression. What Kaeldar found instead were ghosts. He first saw the woman when the drones tracked a heat signature beneath the rubble. She was curled around a small child, both trembling but alive. Soldiers in faded uniforms approached them cautiously, not enemies, but not allies either. This, he would later learn, was a civil war. Lines blurred here. Families divided by language and memory, not by ideology. The older soldier with a crow's-footed face offered them water. The boy cried when he drank, the sound piercing through Kaeldar's auditory filters with inexplicable force. That was when Kaeldar noticed Sergeant Adrian Voss for the first time.
Human. Male.
Age, 34. Injuries, healed shrapnel wound, slight limp. Behavior, calm under pressure. Curious, compassionate to civilians. Kaeldar watched him the way predators watched anomalies. Voss moved differently from his peers, not with arrogance, but with deliberate, quiet purpose. He wasn't the commanding officer, yet others deferred to him in subtle ways. A glance before advancing, a nod that preceded retreat. He carried no advanced tech, only a battered rifle and an old photograph folded into his breast pocket. Kaeldar zoomed in once, 3 faces, 2 children. Smiling. Anchors, perhaps. Days passed. Battles came and went. Humans fought in bursts, explosive, frantic, then suddenly still, like the eye of a storm rolling through flesh and steel. Kaeldar remained hidden, recording everything. He grew to understand their tactics, not elegant, not mathematically efficient, but chaotic in a way his simulations could not replicate. Improvised ambushes. Traps using children's toys as lures. Mines hidden in the bodies of livestock. Cruelty born of desperation. But it wasn't the weapons that unnerved him, it was the reasoning. They didn't fight for territory alone. They fought for graves. For memories. For songs and things written in languages that no longer held meaning to the world outside their border. Kaeldar had seen entire systems fall for the sake of resource control or ideological consolidation. Here, they bled for names. One evening, beneath an acid-tinged sunset, Kaeldar followed Voss's squad to a ruined church. Not for combat, but for shelter. The soldiers formed a perimeter, posted a watch, and lit a fire using broken pews. Then, something happened that short-circuited every expectation Kaeldar held. They sang. It wasn't loud or rehearsed. A few hummed. One played a harmonica. Voss whispered lyrics, words Kaeldar's translator didn't fully grasp. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't rational. It served no battlefield advantage. And yet, the morale it kindled, the way it made their shoulders lower, their laughter rise, Kaeldar recorded it all.
He could not quantify it.
Back in his hidden camp, he reviewed the footage again and again. Singing, comfort, memory. None of these were data points in Othelian war doctrine. Then came the ambush. A shell hit the church at dawn. Screaming. Smoke. The fire gone, but the warmth of their song still echoing in Kael'thar's neural receptors. He moved instinctively, faster than his directive allowed. By the time he reached the perimeter, Voss was dragging a wounded comrade behind the altar, firing with his offhand. Blood pooled. Civilians ran into the field only to be cut down by indiscriminate fire. Kael'thar broke protocol. He emitted a field disruption pulse, localized, barely detectable, disabling the attacker's targeting optics for 6 seconds. Just enough. Voss noticed it. His eyes, darting through the chaos, landed exactly where Kael'thar had been cloaked. There was no expression of shock, just understanding and gratitude. The silence that followed the retreat was thick. Bodies lay where they fell. Voss didn't move for a long time. Then he lit a cigarette, his hands shaking slightly. He never looked back to the spot where Kael'thar had stood. That night, Kael'thar recorded his first emotional annotation. They are not efficient. They are not predictable. But they are resilient beyond reason. I do not yet understand if that makes them fragile or indestructible. He paused before logging it. Something had shifted. Kael'thar, once a mere observer, was becoming invested. He now watched not out of duty, but out of a need to understand how a species so fractured, so impulsive, could inspire the kind of loyalty he saw in Sergeant Voss's squad. He didn't yet know that his next report would include a warning, nor that it would be ignored. But he knew this. Something on Earth was dangerous, not because of its weaponry but because of its will. And something in him, buried deep under code and conditioning, had started to awaken. And Kael'thar, alien, soldier, witness, would not be leaving as detached as he had arrived. The town of Durance Hollow had once been a name on Kael'thar's map, a negligible, in the conflict's heat map. Now it was a crater filled with smoke and broken bones. The satellite imagery showed lines of burned-out vehicles and bodies folded into the earth like discarded garments. He arrived during the ashfall, concealed in a shimmer of refracted air, and what he saw etched itself into the deepest stratum of his synthetic memory. 3 factions had converged here: loyalists, separatists, and a foreign militia no one seemed to claim. It wasn't strategy. It was entropy given form, humans devouring one another beneath flags that changed meaning by the hour. There was no order, no front lines, only chaos that howled through alleyways and bled across rooftops. Kael'thar perched atop the skeleton of a shattered high-rise, observing the unfolding carnage through a neural lens that rendered heat signatures in violent hues. The screams were ambient now, like wind through a canyon. But what riveted him wasn't the violence. It was how they moved through it. Sergeant Voss was alive, moving with a limp that had worsened since the last ambush, but his eyes held the same haunted steel. His squad was thinner, 5 soldiers now, down from 9, but they moved like extensions of one will. Not through command, through bond. He followed them through bombed streets, past murals half destroyed by shrapnel and walls peppered with names written in children's chalk. They set up in what had been a library. Books turned to ash, silence now sacred. Voss knelt in the corner and unwrapped a photograph from plastic wrap. The edges were frayed from folding, but he still looked at it as if it were a map back to something precious. Kael'thar, watching unseen, felt something stir in his chest cavity, a thrum unfamiliar and unbidden. The conflict escalated at midday. The foreign militia arrived with armor stolen from another war, another country. Their tactics were brutish: shock charges, indiscriminate artillery, no regard for civilians. The library's ancient walls shook. Windows exploded inward. Kael'thar tracked Voss's squad as they scrambled for defense, hurling smoke grenades and setting tripwire traps with the efficiency of cornered wolves. But they were outgunned. It was not a question of if they would fall, but when. Then came the sound that rewrote Kael'thar's understanding of fear. A child screamed. Not a battle cry, not a wounded soldier, but a pure, terrified wail, high, thin, and impossible to ignore. It came from the eastern corridor of the library, where the ceiling had collapsed hours ago. A girl, no older than 6, emerged from the rubble, dust coating her hair, eyes wide with the primal confusion of those who hadn't yet learned the language of death. Voss didn't hesitate. He sprinted for her, weaving through gunfire, yelling for cover. His squad laid suppressing fire, not to win, but to buy seconds, seconds he spent lifting the child into his arms and covering her with his own body. Kaeldar could calculate the trajectory of every bullet, the probability of every impact, and all of it screamed that Voss would die before he reached safety. But he didn't. Not because of chance. Because Kaeldar intervened. He activated his cloak's deflection pulse, a rare function meant only for emergencies. The nearest soldier, an enemy, saw his rifle jam inexplicably, then saw nothing as a wall of concussive force shattered his skull. It was the second time Kaeldar had broken protocol. There would be consequences. But for reasons he could not yet name, he accepted them. Voss carried the girl into the basement where the last civilians huddled. 8 people, unarmed, exhausted, already preparing for death. His team sealed the exit behind them with a broken bookcase and prepared for what would follow. They didn't speak much, just sat there with their backs to the wall. The child clung to Voss. One of the soldiers, Ramirez, Kaeldar later learned, took out a harmonica. Somehow, impossibly, he played. A soft, slow tune. A lullaby, maybe. The sound floated upward through concrete and ash and memory. Kaeldar watched from above, no longer just recording. He was bearing witness. Minutes later, the explosives detonated. Not enemy bombs, human traps. Remote charges Voss had planted on the upper floor. The building came down in layers, trapping the enemy, sealing the survivors, and burying the moment in silence. It was hours before anyone moved. Then, one by one, the survivors emerged through a maintenance tunnel. Bloodied, soot-covered, but alive. Kaeldar stood at the far end, uncloaked.
He didn't know why.
He told himself it was to observe their reaction, to document first contact under duress. But when Voss saw him, 7 feet tall, armor gleaming with alien design, eyes glowing faintly through the dusk, he didn't reach for his rifle. Instead, he nodded. Acknowledgement. Not of species. Not of alliance. Of something shared in the smoke. Kaeldar said nothing. He didn't have the language for it yet. But as Voss turned and led the group into the night, the alien remained still, unsure if he had protected humanity or begun to betray something in himself. Back in his bunker, Kaeldar recorded a private note, one that would never reach command. They do not fight cleanly. They do not fight logically. But they fight with a kind of madness that should terrify any civilization that mistakes empathy for weakness. I have now seen what makes them dangerous. And I have also seen why they deserve to be feared and loved. He didn't power down his recorder. He simply sat there in the dark, listening to the faint echo of a harmonica that had already faded from the world above. Dawn broke like a bruise over the city's ruins, casting a copper hue across broken towers and shattered glass. Smoke curled from the horizon where fresh conflict had sparked, but the streets below remained still, scarred and silent. Kaeldar stood in the center of a crumbling plaza, his presence fully revealed. The Othelian armor glinted in morning light, its surface etched with carbon burns and plasma scoring. He had discarded the cloak. He wanted to be seen. For the first time, Kaeldar no longer felt like an outsider documenting a foreign species. He had crossed an invisible line days ago when he shielded Sergeant Voss and the child from certain death. It wasn't strategy. It was instinct, something older than programming, something dangerously close to belief. Voss arrived with the others just as the light touched the highest ruin. They approached without weapons raised. Ramirez and 2 others flanked the rear, visibly tense, yet unwilling to fire. Voss stopped a few paces from the alien, his boots crunching on glass. His voice, when he spoke, was hoarse but steady. "You saved us. Twice." Kaeldar's translator rendered the words into synthetic tones, but their meaning vibrated beneath the surface, deeper than language. He nodded once. Voss took a step closer. "We've seen drones.
We've seen things in the sky.
Thought we were imagining it. But now it's you. You're real." Kaeldar spoke slowly. "I was sent to observe, not interfere. That directive has changed. You broke it. I amended it. Silence followed, not the silence of fear, but of calculation. Voss glanced back at his squad, then at the horizon where another column of smoke rose like a warning. "Then I need you to make another amendment," he said. "We're being overrun. The militia found chemical caches. They're going to burn the West Corridor, civilians still trapped. We can't stop them alone." Kael'thar's jaw flexed, the internal musculature adapting to the weight of decision. "My presence will change the nature of your war. If I act directly, others will follow. Observation ships. Commanders. You will no longer be forgotten." "We don't want to be remembered," Voss replied. "We want to live." It was not a plea. It was a demand made with the calm gravity of someone who had run out of options. Kael'thar understood. Logic was faltering. Morality had become a tangle of variables. But clarity, true clarity, often emerged from chaos. He nodded again. "Then we fight." The operation was swift. Kael'thar led, his armor absorbing the worst of the initial firestorm. Voss and his team moved behind him like phantoms, taking out stragglers with brutal efficiency. Where Kael'thar brought precision and overwhelming force, they brought creativity, Molotovs hidden in food carts, snare traps disguised as rubble. It was asymmetrical, improvised, and devastatingly effective. They reached the chemical cache just as the militia began preparing their incendiaries. The soldiers were masked, their movements mechanical, as if repeating a ritual they no longer believed in. Kael'thar didn't hesitate. He surged forward, disarming 3 before they even registered his presence. The others turned to flee but met Voss's squad in the alley. No speeches, no surrender, just flashes of gunfire and the grunt of close combat. In the aftermath, Kael'thar stood among the flames, watching as the chemicals hissed and burned harmlessly under the containment field he had deployed. The air shimmered with heat. Voss walked up beside him, panting, streaked with blood not his own. "You didn't have to do this," Voss said, not as accusation, but as acknowledgement. "I did," Kael'thar replied. "I could not return to silence after hearing your war songs." The phrase surprised even him. Voss blinked, then offered a tired smile. "Never thought I'd see the day an alien quoted our music." "I don't understand your lyrics," Kael'thar said, "but I understand their purpose." They stood in that ruined square, beneath a banner half-burned and flapping weakly in the wind. Civilians were emerging from hiding, dazed and cautious. Some stared in awe. Others ran. A child looked at Kael'thar with wide eyes and didn't scream. That, perhaps, was the beginning of something. Later, as the sun began to set, Kael'thar transmitted his final report. It bypassed normal encryption. It was not for command's review. It was for the archive, an unredacted truth. Human warfare is not governed by logic. It is governed by memory, myth, and madness. They are not a threat because of their weapons. They are a threat because they refuse to be extinguished. I cannot recommend subjugation. I cannot recommend withdrawal. Only contact. Only listening. He closed the file and watched the horizon burn. Beside him, Voss sat on a collapsed statue. He held a radio but didn't turn on. For a moment the city was still. Kael'thar looked toward the stars, and for the first time in his long campaign life, did not long to return to them. Not yet.